I'm an only child. To put your only child in an airplane to a country that you've never even been, an act of love and an act of courage that I couldn't duplicate later on in life.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Jenny Kazaza, and I'm going to shake up the beginning the first time in 70 episodes. I am going to say in the very, very beginning of the show, please like, share, comment, subscribe, give us a rating. I want to hear more from you guys. I want to hear what you guys like, what you dislike, what you want to see more of. I really am looking to build a community with this podcast, but I really need your help. I need the engagement to increase. So if you want to come and join us on the Substack, we have some challenges. We got chat going on over there. We got articles. We got chapters from the podcast. We got the podcast. It's a really great place and fun place to be. And you could email me as well. Any way to contact me. I promise I don't bite, but I really want to hear from you guys and what you guys think. If you guys have been listening to the show for a while, I thank you. I thank you so much. It's been, over 70 episodes, and I appreciate you for listening and being a fan for this long. So without further ado, let's get into this episode because it's a good one. Today's guest is a true warrior of the shadows, someone who lived a life most of us only read about. He's a New York Times bestselling author, a former CIA senior operations and paramilitary officer, and one of the original members of the Bin Laden task force. He served 24 years in the CIA, from jungle operations in Central America to leading counterterrorism missions after 9/11, working alongside Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. A refugee, a pararescueman, a patriot. His life is a masterclass in courage, sacrifice, and mental toughness. Ladies and gentlemen, without further introduction, Ric Prado. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's quite an honor. Thank you.
Oh, Chris. So let's dive right into it. I'm curious because you were a Peter Pan refugee. You ripped from your home, sent to the United States alone as a child. That's terrifying. How did that experience shape your mental toughness at such a young age?
Well, first of all, I like to put it in perspective. The real
Yeah.
sacrifice was that of my parents.
Okay.
You understand, I'm an only child,
Mhm.
and to put your only child in an airplane to a country that you've never even been, an act of love and an act of courage that I couldn't duplicate later on in life. But to answer your question, in reality, I think that was the beginning of the forging of my mettle. So I would end up doing what God wanted me to do, which was just what I did. Growing up was pretty quick because I went from an idyllic, childhood, horses and BB guns and all this kind of stuff, to having to wear a uniform and being indoctrinated in school. And then in desperation, my parents sent me out and I ended up in a Catholic orphanage through the Peter Pan program in Pueblo, Colorado. Not only was it the drastic change from idyllic childhood to the trauma of communism, to having to travel as a 10-year-old on an airplane by yourself, but then ending up in an orphanage, that was fairly rough. I mean, you have several cultures and languages and a lot of angry kids because who the hell likes being an orphan? So yeah, I think that was the foundation and the starting of my mettle.
Especially when you have parents. It's not like your parents passed away. It was a totally different experience compared to if your parents passed away.
That is correct. And I think that was part of the lifeline too. I had hope, which is something that some of the other kids didn't have. My dad promised me the day that I was at the airport, because my mom was crying, and I told him, I'm not leaving if she's crying. And my dad took a knee, put his hand on my shoulder and said, I will see you again. My dad was my biggest role model. So that was my security blanket through all those times by myself, was the fact that I knew that I was going to see them again.
And when was it that you saw them again? At what age?
I was one of the fortunate ones. My parents got me. We were reunited about 9 months later. I mean, it sounds like 9 months is nothing, but 9 months.
That's a long, for a child. I mean, and how were those 9 months that you experienced by yourself and adjusting to a whole new culture?
I just set foot in the United States, and I come from a tropical Havana, and now I'm in Colorado. I had quite a mix of kids there. The first thing that happened to me, I was in the shower, and three white kids come up and ask me a question, did I like Mexicans? I knew 2 or 3 words in English, and I said yes. That was a mistake. I mean, 10-year-old, 12-year-olds don't get into real fights, but nonetheless, there was 3 of them, and so I got my first clipping when I was, at 10. I turned 11 at the orphanage. But it's funny because with that, I learned how to make friends. I learned how to deal with individuals that were my enemies. And, so all of a sudden, I had my own little support mechanism of guys that, we were sticking together. But it was still a rough start. I mean, it's like everything else. I don't have any PTSD or anything else from it. But it was a tough time. I got to go back to the orphanage about 10 years ago when I was working in Colorado. And that was almost a spiritual experience because, the reconciling from a child to an adult, it was quite a trip.
Now, fast forwarding to, going into the military and stuff, was that a plan for you, like from childhood, or how did you end up on the military route? And then, we'll go in
Yeah,
further. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I was always an adventurous kid. My dad taught me, I had a horse before I had a bicycle. My dad was originally a cowboy before he became a businessman. Coming to the States, growing up, and I got around with a rougher crowd in school. There was a lot of tensions down there, racial
Now, did
tensions.
you stay in Colorado, just to be
No, no,
clear?
yeah,
Okay.
no, my parents came to Miami.
Okay.
And then they were eventually able to they sent me down probably about a month
Okay.
after I
So you grew up in Florida.
bet, yeah, South
Okay.
Florida in a very bad area because
Right.
that's all my parents could afford. My mom was working in a sweatshop and my dad loading trucks and mowing lawns just to put a little bit of food on the table. That I did get a little bit with the wrong crowd. I was always getting in fights. I had good grades, but I had bad conduct. I outgrew that, of course. I think that when I graduated from high school, started my first year of college, I was in Miami-Dade Junior College. All of a sudden, I developed this guilt about, man, this country has done so much for me and for my family. How do I pay it back? And because I was always reading about, the OSS and, the World War II and what they did and the James Bond novels and all that other stuff, I had that itch, but I had never met anybody that was in the military. I had nobody, and nobody in my family had ever
Oh.
served in any military. I was in an oceanography class because I was studying to be a marine science technician, professional diver. This guy had been a pararescue, an Air Force pararescue. And we got to talking, and he's the one that recruited me. And that was my start. I went into the pipeline for pararescue, which is part of the special operations community, the SEALs, Green Berets, blah, blah, and all that. So in December of 71, I started the pipeline and made it. I thought I was a tough kid until I got into pararescue.
Rescue is like no joke. It's and it's at any point you could be gone at any point throughout it. Like, did
Oh, yeah.
you have struggles, and what were they? And did you, by the way, before knowing pararescue, did you know what you were getting into? Like, did you train for it, or it was just
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was always fit. I started martial
okay?
arts when I was 15 and I started running and everything else once I knew that I was going to go in the military. So I wasn't in terrible shape. It's just like you mentioned, the attrition is 80 to 85% of the people
Yeah.
that don't make it. And you could make it, a lot of people made it at the beginning because it was a pretest, but after the second week, they're gone. I don't think I struggled. I think my mindset, again, created from my childhood and my dad's influence, was one of that. Once I got in there, I said, I ain't dead. I ain't gonna quit. It is just I would rather die than go back home with my tail between my legs and said that I failed at this. And subconsciously that was there.
Mm-hmm.
So were there times where you going, what am I doing here? Or what was I thinking? Yeah, but those were brief and we had good camaraderie. Very few people understand the cohesion of going through that kind of training for over a year. Because at the time, I think it was like 14 months with the same guys, putting up with the same, the challenges. You have that base of support, and to tell you the truth, after the class that we started with, only one guy failed later on, and that was because he had a really bad attitude, got sideways with everybody. So he was kicked out. But by the time we had a really cohesive bunch of guys that supported each other. It was good.
So going from pararescue, then CIA, I mean, you're always choosing the hard path. You're always like, and it's interesting too, because it's like, I want to get back to my country. It's what you said earlier, right? But then it's like you pretty much gave your whole life to the country, right? You didn't get out of it. You like just moved to a new branch, you know? And what made you kept stepping into like the fire instead of away from it?
Well, I think the lure of doing something with a purpose,
Hmm.
it's habit forming. I was in pararescue for 6 years, then I went to a 20th Special Forces out of Fort Lauderdale, all in reserves. I did 2 years active and a total of 8 years with the reserves. Once you get that feeling of, hey, I can make a difference, that's very addictive and very, very rewarding because I mean, I've lived an idyllic life. My dream was to go to Vietnam because I wanted to fight for my country. Of course, I got my beret in early 1993, so Vietnam was pretty much going down the tubes by then. I applied to the agency in 74. They came back with a real nice note saying, we're firing, not hiring, because this was the post-Vietnam attrition for both the military and intelligence. And then I applied again in 1980. What I had done was, once I went into the reserves in 74, I joined the fire department. I was a paramedic, pararescue R, EMT2s from the start. I rode rescue in Miami in the 70s, which was a very interesting time, for 6 years.
Mm.
So in 80, when I reapplied to the agency, that's how they brought me on board. They needed a paramilitary guy that was a medic that could, support our special activities division, which is the agency's, the CIA's, special forces, for lack of a better word, special operations forces. So
Like working in special forces, you work alongside other special forces, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, what separates the good from the great in the field?
well, I think that by the time that you make it to the profession, once you go through the path into the profession, both in the special operations military and then definitely in the special operations of the agency, the selection has been done. You cannot have an elite anything if you don't have good recruitment and attrition. If everybody makes it in and everybody makes it through, you're not elite. That's just a basic, So by the time that you come out of that, you have the camaraderie, you have the mentors. My first a mentor besides my dad was a guy named Wayne Fisk, who's a legendary pararescueman that to this day, I still ask him, what did you see in me when I was a 21-year-old snot? That you befriended me. This guy's a war hero, 4 tours of Vietnam, Sun Tay raid, you name it. And like I said, to this day, we're very, very good friends. So I think that
What do you see in you, by the way?
he eventually, after a couple of bourbons, I got him to talk about it. He looks at me and says, "You reminded me of me." So that was pretty cool. That was a
Yeah.
hell of a compliment. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, kind of my hero. But back to your question is basically you do, like in any profession, you have your fair share of idiots.
Hmm.
They may have make it physically and they might have made it technically, but then they had the personality of an elbow or always getting into or in your face. And that there's attrition there too. In both in the agency and in the special operations field, you could be really, really good, but if you really get sideways with everybody, you're not going to go far.
How do you like, speaking of like CIA and pararescue and all this stuff, like especially we had Nick McKinley on the show, Pararescue, and he talks about the high stake, the pressure and what you see is like, because you guys are like the emergency for for everybody, right? And what you see, you have to really be able to stay calm. And how do you silence the fear and make decisions under pressure?
Well, I think that's part of the training. And like I said, these kind of professions, the way to really succeed, and by succeed, I don't mean becoming a 3-star general. I mean just succeeding in your mission. I go back to purpose. If you believe you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, your backbone gets a lot stiffer. You get that extra jolt. But there is, honestly, I believe we're all wired a certain way when we're born. I think God has a path or an idea for you and pushes you through in that direction. If you're willing to pay the price of admission, you'll be happy. And I've lived a very idyllic life. I mean, to me, everything that I've done, I pinch myself every morning. I really, really do. But the mindset for staying calm comes from a confidence that is built through the attrition and purpose. And you get nervous before and afterwards you go, oh man, what was I thinking? But during, if you're trained, you're focused, you're switched on. That's all that matters. When I've been in harm's way, as much as I love my family, I never thought of my wife or my kids because that would have been a lethal distraction. This is what I'm doing now. This is all I'm doing.
That's
So
hard. Sometimes you just, I mean, we can't control what our thoughts are. People are like, we control our thoughts. No, I don't control these thoughts. Sometimes the things that come in my mind, I'm like, what am I thinking? That's not in my control. I mean, I couldn't help but sometimes it might just step in my line of fire, and that all of a sudden then puts your body into a reaction, because it just happens sometimes. How do you like, I guess it's a way like all that training that you guys do to get ready and you have to trust that. Was there a training failure that really taught you this lesson?
well, yes and no. I mean, I had an incident in mountain climbing school when I got hurt and I got set back. Caught up with my class later on, but we were set back. And that was very painful, not only physically, because it was a good injury. I think that just the fear of failing, it accelerated my recovery and everything else. But, there's a certain cockiness that special operators develop. And a lot
Hmm.
of people take it wrong. They think that, yeah, he's just an arrogant or he just thinks he's hot stuff. But no, it's part of the mentality that you have that I can get anything done.
Hmm.
And I think that one of the reasons, and I do a lot of mentoring for young individuals that are wanting to get into the agency or the military, and I always tell them that. I say, the conviction of going in and making those kind of sacrifices, that is your mission, and that builds it builds that calmness. After a while, you gain that confidence, you gain the camaraderie, you try to emulate your mentors, which is an important thing in any business, as you know. Leaders lead. There's a big difference between leaders and managers. So yeah, for us, there wasn't a pivotal moment when I said, "Oh no." I think that the minute I decided that I was going to make pararescue or die, and that was literally in my mind. I will
Hmm.
drown, pass out, I will fall out of a mountain. I don't care, but I am doing it. I think once you find it, you get that beret, you get that trident if you're a SEAL, whatever it is, there's now you have this confidence. Say, look, if I was able to do this,
Hmm.
and I've used that in perspective all my life. Every time I've been in a really bad spot, and I get depressed or something like that, I go, dude, really? Come on, you got this. And so that's the confidence level that you can rebuild.
So speaking of like getting down and getting depressed, I'm curious in terms of like you've seen war, you've seen, terrorism, betrayal, like you've seen the worst of humanity, right? And you how do you still believe in something worth protecting and like not let bitterness win?
Well, like I said, I do believe in what I did throughout my career. I've never had a civilian job since high school. When I went into the military after that, it always was, you know, pararescue, paramedics, blah blah blah, CIA, and everything else. You steel yourself to things. I honestly think that when you get to that point in your career and you know you're making a difference, you can't let it go because we are one percenters. You figure that barely 2% of the population in the United States serves at any given time. And that's military writ large. That's everything from motor pool to cops, whatever. And then on top of that, you become 1% of that 2%. That is a focus and that is a mission-driven personality that you groom and you polish too. Yes, I've seen a lot of ugly things. I've seen a lot of beautiful things because there's nothing like saving a life. And I'm very honored that I've done that several times. I read something a few months ago that really resonated. The guy was saying that, and I'm paraphrasing, it is harder to forget the people you could not save than the people that you had to kill. And that was so profound to me because, you shouldn't hate your enemy, but if they're trying to kill you, guess what? You got to kill them. You don't have to
Right.
hate them, you just got to kill them. But the burden of not being able to save somebody or losing somebody that you were trying to save, I get asked a lot from people, well, your temperament and what you've been through, do you suffer from PTSD? I said, no, I really don't. That doesn't mean I don't have memories.
Mhm.
And ironically, being shot at, being in harm's way for, all these years, the things that come back once in a while to me are mostly kids that I couldn't save when I was a paramedic. We,
Mhm.
we, we tried everything. We thought we succeeded. And there's a couple of vignettes in the book about that time. And I think that again, that was another pivotal point in my life where I understood the feeling of being able to save somebody, but then the feeling that no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't. In one specific case, it was very devastating because my daughter had just been born. And it's this little kid that fell in the pool and drowned. And I was giving him mouth to mouth on the ambulance. And he literally vomited in my mouth 3 times while I was giving him mouth to mouth. Never fazed me. His mom was in the front seat and she was looking at me like, who is this? And what's going on here? Because I would just go, poof, spit it out, go back to mouth until I got to the hospital. When we got him on the gurney and the doctor says he's nice and pink, we got it. I almost fainted because all that adrenaline all of a sudden dropped on me. So and unfortunately the kid didn't make it because he had been under the water too long. His brain, he was resuscitated, but his brain was not functioning anymore.
That's rough. That's just sad. I was sitting in the airport 2 days ago, and there was a mechanical issue on the plane, and we had to deplane and wait and sit around, and it ended up being like, I don't know, around 8 hours, I think it was 5 to 8 hours, like in terms of airport. And I remember like turning to like this wall that had like a mirror, and I just looked at myself and I was just smiling. And I was like, how great is this life? I was just like, like it's just funny because I'm looking around and there's some people that are just complaining and upset. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, I mean, so grateful this happened before we took off, number one, right? And also, like, it's just a minor inconvenience for just, it's just the modern day comfort, the comfort that we have in modern life, we tend to take for granted. And the life that we have, we tend to take for granted. And sometimes I look around and I just realize, like you said, like, I feel so blessed, and I think that a lot of us tend to lose sight of that.
And one thing that I get asked a lot is, how can you be like this? And, the country's a mess and everything is this and everything else is that. And what I tell people is the problem that we have in the United States that we do not appreciate what we have because we
Mhm.
don't have anything to compare it to. I was giving a talk about a year ago, and this lady in the crowd disagreed with me. She said, well, I've been to Mexico and it was fine. And it was one of these things that I just clicked and said, no, ma'am, you went to Cancun on a cruise.
Mm.
And she went, like, how did you know that? It was a wild guess because most Americans, when we travel, if you go to Europe, you go to the nice parts of Europe. You
Right.
don't go into the Muslim control areas or the highly dangerous areas. You go stay in a nice hotel, you travel well and everything else. Americans as a whole, very few of us really have something to compare it with because of my childhood and what I saw about communism, and then the fact that I fought it for another five, incarnations and terrorism. You learn a lot about how messed up the world is. I mean, we're far from perfect. In my humble opinion, we're still the best there is.
Mhm.
And we are the world leader, and we have a big responsibilities.
Yeah, we're very blessed Americans, we're very, very blessed. And what did you learn? Was there anything new that you learned about leadership, or was there anything new that you learned in the CIA, or any lesson there that you learned there and you didn't learn earlier in life?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the day you stop growing, that's the day you start dying. I mean, so
Hmm.
you should always be striving to be better at whatever you can be. I get back to leadership all the time
Hmm.
because the people that gravitate to the special communities are usually very strong-willed individuals, men and women, because the agency is one of those where it's not like the military where there's a kind of a big difference between the male operators and the few female operators. In the agency, we have almost as many female case officers as we do male case officers. But leadership is what it's all about. And I always tell people, I say, when we're talking about kids, I said, kids learn from what you do, not from what you say. The example that you give. And it's the same thing in an environment. Your manager, if your leader, if he or she is a real leader, that person should be a father figure or a mother figure to you. They should be taking you under their wing. They should be grooming you. So I'm a firm believer that when, the job of a leader is to take that C-level worker or operator, make them a B-level, take the B-levels and make them A-levels, and take the A-levels and make them your replacement.
Okay.
So you groom the individuals. And I was blessed with that. I think in my whole 24 years in the agency, I had one boss who was a total jerk. And he lasted like 3 months. He got pulled out of thing because the guy was kind of like lunatic. Yeah, well, that's a problem with places like the agency and in the special operations community. Playing well with others is not always the way to go. There's a lot of strong personalities and
lot of strong. That's actually one of my questions I want to ask you. Like, how do you work with all these strong personalities, especially, it's like they're just natural leaders, right? And sometimes they have to follow. And how does that come into the mix?
Well, and that is exactly the point. I mean, if you are following somebody that you respect, that becomes a role model, that is grooming you, that's what you're going to become if you do things right and if you have the work ethic and the morality behind it and everything else. So it is part of that process. And if you have a failing company, the first thing you need to look at is you're failing because of what lack of leadership. Why aren't you being able to rise up your troops? This is why, professional coaches in sports and stuff are so important because they know how to wind you up. And it's the same thing in the special operations community. You have, the guy or gal that's sitting up there briefing you on a mission doesn't go, well, this is kind of important, but, but we want you to do it. No, it's like, hey, guys, this is life and death. You're the only tool we have in the toolbox. We need you to go and fix this. And that gives you focus, and that gives you, again, purpose. And I think that combination is what makes you a strong follower, makes you a strong player, and eventually, hopefully, a good leader. Because, like in my case, one of the reasons I still do a lot of mentoring is Wayne Fisk and those Billy Waugh and all these friends of mine, I can't pay them back for what they did for me. I can only pay it forward. That's all I ask when I mentor somebody at the end of my talk. I always tell them, I said, listen, because they say, oh, thank you for taking the time. I said, no, let me explain. I am doing this, not necessarily for you. And all I ask of you is that when you get into that position, don't forget that you didn't get there by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And help those others, again, go through the ABC process. So,
how did you then find your next purpose when you left the agency for the first time, like civilian life?
It's funny because a lot of people said, man, you've planned your life. No, I honestly, it's like, at least in my case, because I've been accused of being hard-headed, God's messages came via a 2x4, upside the head, like boom, all of a sudden. So you read the book. So at the end of my career, the agency, I was very frustrated because we had capabilities that were life-saving capabilities, that were country-saving capabilities, and we were not being allowed to implement them fully because of political reasons, which is the death of any intelligence or military organization, is to try to run operations through the politics. Operations are operations, and those are the parameters. Yeah, at the end of the day, that's where you end up. You end up following those steps, and it becomes common to you. That is your world, and you live within it, and hopefully you lead through it too.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. One of my final questions I ask everybody on the show is, what can we do on a daily basis to strengthen our mindset to be able to handle the challenges and things that come our way? And also I want to say, especially for an American, I want to make that one clear, because we talked about how, we take our modern comfort for granted. So I'm curious on what you have for us.
Yeah, and that is the truth. I have often said that if I was king for a day, you could not graduate high school until you did 30 days in a third world country. Leave your iPad behind, leave your iPhone behind, get Montezuma's Revenge, watch the way that, little kids play, in country X. It is just, and see what's out there and have something to compare it to. But again, I think that the United States is a wonderful country. We're made of humans, so we're far from perfect. I think the difference, you see it in world history. When they started with the issue about leaving Afghanistan and leaving, now Ukraine and this, that, and the other, a lot of people got pretty, snarky with the United States about, well, how could you? We can't depend on you to help us anymore. And my comeback to them was always like, look at your history. After World War II, the only territory that the United States gained was the cemeteries where our men and women are buried overseas. It says we didn't go into that war because we were being threatened directly. We went into that war because it was the right thing to do, and we lost millions of people in that conflict. But everything goes back to finding a purpose in life. That you're making a difference. I have a neighbor here at our cabin that her passion is taking care of pets. She was the president of the Humane Society for the county and everything else. And she's always happy because she's always doing something that she believes, and she's finding families for these dogs, and the families are elated because now they have this good little dog, and so on. So it is, you don't have to be a doctor, lawyer, or Indian chief. It's just whatever you go into, do it with some purpose and help people along the way, and have a reason to get up at night. I will tell you, the biggest blessing in my life besides my family is the fact that I have never, since high school, woke up in the morning and said, oh shit, I got to go to work. Never, ever. I did 3 years in the jungles of Nicaragua and Honduras with a Contra program, sleeping in a jungle hammock Monday through Friday. Never did I get up and go, what are you doing here? No, it was like, yeah, I'm here. So I believe in a purpose-driven life. I think that is probably the single strongest comment I can make on that.
So then I have to follow up with this real quick. What steps can one take to find purpose if they feel really lost?
I would say the counseling of friends, people that you respect. Again, hopefully you have a mentor. I think that's one of the issues that, again, the world is suffering from, is that parents are not parenting. There's this trend, let the schools teach them whatever the heck it is, and that's wrong. So I think that when you're down, and we have a pretty strong network that we check on each other, because people like us, after a certain time, there's a lot of scars there. And everybody has a bad day, somebody, your parents die, and or your cousin dies, or you see something, or somebody in your family is afflicted with an illness and all this. There's a lot of negative things in the world. but try to focus on what you do have. The fact that your iPad doesn't work today is not a world crisis. The world crisis is that your wife contracted cancer or something like that. That's tragic. I think it's attitudinal. I think it's something that we need to inculcate to our children and as adults to our subordinates, is that positive aspect of, hey, you're making a difference. This is what you do. I used to tell my kids, you don't have to be a Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine to serve, or a cop. I said, you could be a doctor, work a cosmetic doctor in Hollywood doing nothing but making people prettier and driving a Ferrari. And that's great. That's the American dream. Once a year, you get your butt on an airplane and you go to some third world country and you fix kids with cleft palates, or you go to Cambodia and you try to help the victims of mine bombings and all this kind of stuff. That's giving back, and that's purpose. I have a very good friend of mine who's a doctor, very successful surgeon, and he disappears 2 or 3 times a year because he goes to Haiti, or he's been to Ukraine, pro bono, helping individuals out. We've become friends partially because of that, because I admire the fact that here's a guy that's got a very strong, profession, and he said, stop. I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks. I'm going to go to Haiti to the orphanage. So I think that's what develops that particular path.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being on the show. You're a pleasure. It was so great talking with you.
Well, same. I love your enthusiasm. You ask some good questions too. It's refreshing after as many podcasts as I've done when you have somebody that comes in and does something like that. But, I also want to compliment you because of what you do.
Thank you.
It is extremely important. We need your education. When you take these efforts to show other people, good stories, successful stories, or paths to success, that's priceless, because that's one of the things that gives you hope. Somebody that said, will listen to one of your podcasts and go, wow, she interviewed this lady, and even though she had this, look, she was able to do that. Well, what can I? That kind of thing. So thanks for trying to spread the good news.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you. Thank you guys again for listening to the episode. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, give us a rating. Come join us on the Substack. Again, we're looking to build a community, and we can only do it with your engagement. And if you want, send me over an email, mindsetlessonsfromthefield@gmail.com. Again, I want to hear from you guys. Thank you so much, and I will see you all next Wednesday.